Hello, I'm Caroline Jones. Tonight's Australian story is about a young Australian Army major earmarked for great things in the military. Matina Jewell accelerated through the ranks and served with distinction on challenging overseas operations. But it wasn't until she served as a United Nations peacekeeper during the 2006 Israel-Lebanon conflict that she experienced war at first hand, and with ultimately dire consequences. When it was all over, Matina Jewell discovered that the battles back home were every bit as difficult as surviving in a war zone.
I used to go dawn service with my dad, Little Austinville, in the back of Byron Bay. There was thousands of people. It was like the whole community turned up to the dawn service and then the parade. It was like, it was just phenomenal.
I feel very proud of having served my country as a soldier in the Australian Defence Force. Looking back at my 15-year Army career, I had amazing opportunities and fantastic experiences, but I guess it's with some mixed emotions, having been injured. I suppose when I joined the Army, it was always a consideration. We were always encouraged that if something did go wrong in that rare opportunity or rare case, you would be looked after at the end of the day.
I've been on 5 overseas missions, and I've been asked a few times today if these medals are my father's or my grandfather's, but no, they're actually mine, and these medals are my grandfather's from World War II.
This young woman has been through an enormous amount of achievement, of high performance and conquered challenges, and then to have had what happened to her change her life completely, and to see the bravery and the determination that she shows in getting back to as well as she can be, made it a privilege for me to get to know her.
Matina would strike many people as just an ordinary young Australian, but when she's been put under pressure and required to perform, she's done exactly that, and I think done a great job.
I was 17 when I joined the Army, and my decision to join was that I could do a university degree as well as my military training. After graduating from Duntroon in 1997, I spent 3 years as a lieutenant before being promoted to captain and posted on board HMAS Khiam, one of Australia's 2 largest amphibious ships. I was 24 at the time. I was second in command of the ship's army department and also the ship's amphibious operations. And unfortunately, my boss, the major that was in charge of the army department, fell ill, and suddenly, even though I was only a 2-week captain, I was then an acting major and made commander of the army force on board Khiam.
Which was a pretty extraordinary situation for a young woman to be in that role when most of her peers in commanding in those roles would have been in their early 30s.
11th of September 2001, the 9/11 terrorist attacks occurred in America, and immediately Khiam was assigned to set sail to the Gulf to be part of the international coalition against terrorism. Often I was the only female commanding an all-male crew. I always felt that I needed to earn the respect of my soldiers, and if I had their respect and trust, then they would be happy to follow me. On the way to the Middle East, the commander of HMAS Khiam was very aware of the attacks on the USS Cole the previous year in Yemen, which killed 17 American sailors, and he put in place force protection measures and appointed myself and the Navy operations officer to come up with a plan of how we would defend Khiam and also train the crew. As part of leading this team, I needed to qualify in the skill of fast roping from helicopters. So once we got to the Middle East, before we'd bring Canimbla into a port, I would go ahead with my wharf security team and we would either speedboat insert or fast rope from a helicopter onto the wharf and secure the area from any mines or explosives or bombs.
She really didn't see any barriers to her physical limits, but she very much wanted to be part of the team. You know, she wasn't the type to be an exhibitionist or a self-promoter.
I had an amazing experience of actually planning and executing joint operations with the American Navy SEALs, who are special forces like our SAS, where we would be at night out there boarding and pouncing on smuggler ships that were bringing in illegal contraband, oil, arms, weapons. These operations, certainly the adrenaline's flowing when you're out there. With smuggler ships, it's unknown what their actions might be, and you're certainly on high alert. Sometimes in the military you get thrown in the deep end, and often that's the best way to learn, but it was a lot of responsibility at a relatively young age.
So this is the restaurant here, Sienna Marina. It's owned by Daniel, who's from Lebanon.
I was really looking forward to another opportunity of working in the Middle East, and I was selected to be a peacekeeper with the United Nations in Syria and Lebanon, and it was a 12-month posting.
Marhaba. كيفك؟
كيفك؟ منيحة؟
ممتاز.
لك.
Alhamdulillah.
Nice to see you.
Around that time I met Clint Jewell, who is a marketing executive in Sydney. And I was instantly attracted to Clint. He has an amazing ability just to make everybody feel at ease.
Hey, cheers.
كيسك.
I would never have thought I'd have fallen for a army officer. Matty was a person that I was absolutely intrigued and captivated by. The more we spent time, the more we got to know each other, the stronger we felt toward each other. The fact was, it was just challenging to get time together.
It was because he mistook you for a military officer.
No,
Well, it was probably a very tearful departure from Australia and quite torn, because I really did think Clint was the man of my dreams and the right one for me. But I really also wanted to go and do this role that was going to be great for my future career. So I went to the Middle East as a peacekeeper, first to Syria and then Lebanon. I knew that there'd been a very long history of unrest between Israel and her Arab neighbours, Syria and Lebanon. But I didn't think that on this peacekeeping operation it would be far more dangerous than anything I'd experienced in my 15-year career. I had a great sense of pride wearing the UN Blue Beret. I really enjoyed the opportunity to support and help disadvantaged communities. I lived in Tyre, which is a port town in southern Lebanon, and this is where the UN had their rear duty headquarters. And I was assigned to patrol base Khiam, which was 2 hours drive from Tyre, for up to 7 days at a time, and this was the most remote of the UN patrol bases in Lebanon. I was surprised how small the base was. It was only about the size of a tennis court, and there would be 5 UN observers operating there at a time.
So just a quick look at me. How you doing?
I had great teammates, but I was particularly close to 3 of them. Wolf from Canada, Du from China, and Big Mac from Finland. Wolf was a real larrikin, loved practical jokes, and Du was very quiet and industrious, very intelligent. Big Mac was another great character, loved his Formula One racing, and I got on just like a house on fire with Big Mac.
Oh, you got it on video.
All 3 of them treated me like a little sister in some respects, particularly Wolf, who I had a great sort of sibling rivalry with, and it just really was such a great team atmosphere. We had a very close bond. In fact, I do really consider them like brothers. As you can see, it's quite a spectacular view from our patrol base. We were located on the disputed border between Israel and Lebanon, and this is where the border starts between Israel and Lebanon. The United Nations had peace agreements in the region, and our role was to observe and report any violations by Israel or the Hezbollah. The building just over here is another Hezbollah position. So this is Patrol Base Khiam here, this designated by that little blue dot on the map. And the closest Hezbollah position is just here, only 75 metres from the patrol base, so you can see
That's
how close it is.
Hezbollah started out as a militia in 1978 after an Israeli invasion. Around Patrol Base Khiam were a number of important Hezbollah facilities, the first being a major headquarters located in the town near the base.
So up here was our observation platform.
I really am surprised that there's no overhead protection. When I visited Patrol Base Khiam in 1996, I was struck by the fact that for a base that had been there for 30 years, it still looked quite temporary. And also it wasn't as hardened and as protected as I thought a base should be, given that occasionally there used to be ferocious wars fought around it. And that exposed spiral staircase is on the Israeli side, so that's where all the bombs and rockets are coming from.
Glad I got the opportunity to come and visit you in Lebanon.
Absolutely. Having left Clint behind in Australia, I honestly thought the relationship wouldn't survive a year in the Middle East. That was a lot to ask for someone I'd only met just a couple of months before.
This is off tier. Fantastic.
Clearly I missed her, and after 3 months I decided to move to the Middle East also.
Here we are on the boat, heading home after a great day. There's where we live.
It was an amazing part of the world, a terrific place where one could have a great time.
Arab tunes blasting away. It's 12th of July on Patrol Base Khiam. We've had a call to go back to the patrol base as there's artillery fire and small arms firing around Patrol Base Khiam. We have all the guys back here at Patrol Base Khiam. We've just seen a lot of activity and small arms actually firing in our area.
I was out patrolling when we had an urgent call over the radio for all UN vehicles to move to the nearest patrol base, as the Hezbollah, in a daring raid, had ambushed an Israeli Humvee patrol. And in the ambush itself, 3 Israeli soldiers had been killed and 2 had been captured and taken back into southern Lebanon.
Oh! Whoa! Impact! Large impact! Aerial bomb! 2 Alpha's just been hit with an aerial bomb.
This action sparked retribution from the Israeli Defence Force, the IDF, right along the border, and turned out to be the start of the 34-day Lebanon War. It is well known that Israel has a policy of retaliation with maximum force.
Flares.
I can still remember the stabilising fins off the back of this 1,000-pound bomb as it whizzed past me at eye level, the most 30 metres from us, and impacting into the Hezbollah position, Sierra Papa 1.
Thankfully none of us are injured. There was a bit of shrapnel, and the blast from the rocket hitting the position actually came over the platform here where I'm standing now.
There was certainly a sense of exhilaration and excitement on the patrol base in that initial stages of the war. For me, it was for 14 years of my career I've been waiting to experience something like this, and so it was, I guess, the pinnacle of your career to actually be involved in a war.
It's still
That's undisciplined.
I think in hindsight we should have been terrified of what was next, and there should have been more sense of trepidation from us as peacekeepers if Israel was prepared to take that action on day one, what might unfold over the days that came afterwards.
Clearly I was concerned about Maddie and her circumstances being literally on the front line of a war. I was concerned also for my own safety.
This is on the balcony, and there in the middle of the screen you can see a bomb that's just been dropped. Smoke from that. Here in Tyre.
I understood that Tyre had become a target on account that Israel suspected that their captured soldiers may be in Tyre. And so from day 2 onwards, my level of concern escalated, almost proportionate with the number of bombs that I could see landing in and around Tyre from the balcony.
15th of July in Tyre. See in the center screen the smoke plume, smoke cloud, especially a bomb blast cloud, and they've re-hit targets as activity.
Bombing and flybys pretty much became the norm.
You've got to see it.
And one day, Thousands of pieces of paper literally rained over the harbour, dropped by the Israeli Defence Force.
And this is the propaganda that they're dropping. PSYOPs, they call it. What's that mean?
Psychological operations.
Correct.
There were times when we thought that we might not see each other again.
We're just marking the roof as building. Has been a UN building. And marking it with flags. So
On day 5 of the war, there was an enormous explosion that really rocked the building I was in.
Wolf had joked about whether I put all my boyfriends through this type of testing regime of get them into a war zone and really see what they're made of and make a decision whether I still like them.
We've also had 4 direct hits on top of Sierra Papa 6.
In the first week of the war from Patrol Base Khiam, we reported hundreds of violations of the peace agreement, over 50 near misses and 2 direct hits to the base. The excitement and adrenaline rush had worn off a little bit, and I just had a sense that we weren't going to survive on Patrol Base Khiam.
The other thing to let you know is we just heard from Lima that UNIFIL is going to be shutting down all of the communications.
The peacekeepers were there to observe a truce. There was no truce to observe and report on. They're reporting on a war. That wasn't their job. The Israelis should have been told, hold your fire, the observer force is going out.
Because to me that's absolutely unacceptable to leave us without comms. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, so...
Any reasonable person looking at the circumstances that the UN observers were in could well have concluded that the UN were putting lives at risk.
Got the soldiers out here just doing the final preparations.
The UN had 2 forces in Lebanon. The UNSO force, we were unarmed observers, whereas the UNIFIL force were armed peacekeepers. I was due to rotate from Patrol Base Khiam back into Tyr on day 2 of the war, and it kept being delayed each day until day 6, when 2 UNIFIL armoured vehicles, which are called CISUs, arrived at Patrol Base Khiam. The only reason why I had left the base first was that I'd simply been out there the longest. The CISUs had brought with them one of my teammates, Hans-Peter Lang from Austria, to replace me on Patrol Base Khiam. When I left Khiam, there was just Hans-Peter, Du, Big Mac and Wolf left on Patrol Base Khiam. It was an emotional sort of farewell at the position, in that Wolf in particular was very concerned for my safety during this transit, in light of the fact that Israel had already commenced its ground invasion into southern Lebanon.
Okay, this is Maddie getting ready to depart for her trip to Tyr. As you can see, she's sitting in the front of the CISU. She'll be riding shotgun and giving directions to the driver.
The CISUs were manned by 14 soldiers from the UNIFIL force. As the highest ranking officer, I assumed command of the convoy and was also responsible for navigation.
Yeah, we're waiting to roll out these gates, but...
The UN wouldn't allow us to move without Israel giving a window of opportunity where they would agree not to bomb the roads that we were going to use. The journey from Patrol Base Khiam was quite treacherous, and a number of the roads that I'd planned to take had experienced blast damage from Israeli fighter jets and was simply impassable. And due to the mine threat in southern Lebanon, it's not an option to go off-road. So I was forced to take alternative routes and backtrack at certain stages.
As you can see, we've had an aerial bomb impact the road here. And we're going to have to turn around because the road's been taken out here with a bomb.
When are we going to plan this?
Yep, let's give it a shot.
The transit from Patrol Base Khiam to Tyr would typically take 2 hours to complete, but on this occasion it would extend across 2 days.
But unfortunately we only got halfway, and I've spent the night here at a UN position 9-1. We had a couple of lucky escapes during the transit yesterday, with the IDF dropping aerial bombs on us twice in very close proximity, as we're trying to actually first of all try and get into the CISUs from the patrol base and then later down the track. We also had a Hezbollah team fire a Katyusha rocket over our heads.
I'm in the middle of packing up. Stuff everywhere.
We spoke that night, and it was there that I actually learnt that Maddie wasn't going to make it back into Tyr that day. That was pretty deflating. You know, I was quite concerned that she might not make it.
Both parties, Hezbollah and Israeli Defence Force, talking tough.
Their enemy is stronger and will outlast them.
It crossed my mind that I could be killed. bombs were coming really quite close to some of the apartments where UN families were located. Shrapnel literally coming through the windows and landing on the bed in the bedroom. So there was a decision taken to evacuate to the Rest House Resort, which happened to be where the UN headquarters was based. I opted to go there as well.
Okay, it's 18th of July. We've just been given the order to start moving into Khiam, so we're just loading up the CZUs. As you can see, I'm in the CZU now. The troops aren't in yet.
I was exhausted and extremely anxious about the transit that lay ahead of us to move into Khiam, but I really needed to just get control of those emotions and in some ways put on that facade again of when you take command of a group of soldiers, you need to appear confident.
Yeah, we're rolling. We're 3/4 of the way there.
Certainly during that 2-day transit on the roads, going through village and town after town that had been destroyed by Israel, it was quite disillusioning as a peacekeeper to see that level of destruction and the innocent lives that had been lost.
This area is absolute pounding with shelling.
I think it was sad as a UN peacekeeper to see that the UN was powerless in this situation, and it leaves you to think, well, what good is the UN if they can't help people in need in the time of crisis?
The problem we've got at the moment is there's electrical wires down. We're not sure if there's electricity running through them.
One of the problems I faced as we were getting that approach into Khiam was that every single road that I tried seemed to have been completely destroyed by Israel's bombing, and we'd have to backtrack all the way back and try and find another road.
We just hit another roadblock, so we're turning around again, trying to find another road.
There came a point where the window of opportunity given by Israel to move into Tyre was coming to a close.
Trying what I think was probably our last option to try and get into Tyre.
By then I had exhausted all the roads on my UN-issued map, and I was desperate to find any road that would get us into Tyre safely.
And you were using this map to navigate because there's not much detail there to navigate by.
No, that's right.
The map that Matina was given was a joke. That sort of map you wouldn't give someone navigating around Australia on a holiday, let alone a military operation that required absolutely precise understandings of where you were at any given time.
So I actually ended up using a road that's not marked on this map, just a dirt road that parallels the Litani River. Thankfully, at that point, though, there was a police position, a gendarmerie, and through the policeman's broken English and my poor Arabic, I was able to gain directions to cut through a banana plantation using a farmer's track and then try to get into Tyre from a much more northern approach.
Because the Israelis are attacking from this direction, from south to north.
That's right. My theory was to try and get us further away from the fire that was coming from Israel. So whilst I was on this farmer's dirt track, I received a phone call from my UN headquarters informing me that Israel was about to commence its aerial bombardment of the Tyre region, and we were actually on a road that was going to be targeted.
And we're heading to Tyre as fast as we possibly can, so fingers crossed we make it.
Eventually we made it through to the outlying suburbs of Tyre, and we were hurtling through the streets at top speed. Unfortunately, a civilian vehicle cut in front of our vehicle, and my driver had to hit the brakes hard.
I can't hear you, mate.
And because there's no seatbelts in these UN vehicles, I was thrown forward, impacting into the bulletproof windscreen of the CZU. I was in excruciating pain, and I was thankful that I had been wearing my Kevlar helmet and body armour. I knew I'd done an injury, but I had to keep this convoy rolling and get into the rest house in Tyre. But what I didn't know at the time was the impact that this would have on the rest of my life. Later that day, I was seen by a UN doctor. She suspected that I had sustained a spinal injury. I was forced to spend 2 days lying flat on my back on a tiled floor whilst the UN coordinated a new medical evacuation plan.
Tyre at that point was full of refugees looking to escape, but at that point there was still no way out.
My condition was deteriorating rapidly. I was actually sort of thrashing around. I was losing my vision and my speech.
For her to have been left abandoned with Clint at a hospital that didn't have arrangements with the UN for her treatment was just incompetent.
I simply received a text message stating that Patrol base Khiam is down. One of my teammates was dead. The patrol base had sustained a direct hit from an Israeli fighter jet.
We were still coping with our own situation where Maddie potentially had a broken back.
And that will give us continuing problems, and probably forever. Matina is really quite incapacitated on a day-to-day basis with her back.
And those injuries are permanent, and she's not expected to improve with time.
I'd lost my career, I'd lost my physical abilities, and I was also suffering from losing my teammates that were like brothers to me in Lebanon. When I eventually found out the details of what had actually occurred on patrol base Khiam the day of the fatal bombing, it just made everything so much worse.
So it was a story that no one really wanted to tell. It was an inconvenient truth.